I never imagined a song could lead me to him. It was an ordinary night. Rain was falling outside, the soft kind that doesn't scare you but never really stops. I was alone in my living room, wrapped in a gray blanket, holding a mug of chamomile tea that had gone lukewarm. I felt strangely hollow that week. That quiet kind of melancholy, you know? Like the feeling you get after finishing a really good book and not knowing what to do with the silence it leaves behind. Without thinking much, I opened my music app and started creating a new playlist. I called it Late Night Soul, not soul as in the genre, but soul as in spirit. My favorite songs, the ones I played when the world got quiet and my heart wanted to whisper loud. I added tracks that reminded me of my mom humming in the kitchen while she did the dishes. Others I'd heard from the backseat of my dad's old car during a road trip through sleepy towns. Some came from movies that made me cry in the dark, hoping no one saw. A few were songs I had played while falling in love or thinking I was. I finished it, hit share, and forgot all about it. 2 days later, I got a message. Simple. Direct. No profile picture. Just a basic name, Luke. I liked your playlist. Track 5 broke me a little. I stared at the message for a moment. So many questions. Who was he? How did he even find my playlist? Why that song? I almost ignored it. But something about his words gave me a kind of good chill. The kind that makes you feel like there's something waiting on the other side of ordinary. I replied. Do you ever feel like that song was written just for you? He answered almost instantly. Yes. And I thought I was the only one. That's how it began. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The conversation flowed so naturally, almost intimately, like we were old friends rediscovering something we buried under years of noise. Within hours, we were already exchanging more playlists. He sent me ones with names that felt like poetry, if rain had a voice, or for someone I haven't met yet. Every song felt like a secret message. Some made me smile in the middle of work like an idiot. Others made me close my eyes and remember things I didn't even know I had forgotten. Sometimes, he'd include songs I hadn't heard in years but used to love. Other times, he'd introduce me to new ones that felt like they were written exactly for the moment I was in. I didn't know his age. I didn't know where he lived. I didn't know his voice, his face, his story. But none of that mattered. What mattered was how I felt with every beat he sent my way. A week later, I received the most beautiful playlist I'd ever heard. The title alone made me stop. The soundtrack of Us. Just reading the name made my chest ache a little. It was strange. Us? But it felt so right. So inevitable. I pressed play and let the songs take me wherever they wanted. The first track was warm, like a hug you didn't know you needed. The second was nostalgic. It spoke of meetings that happen in silence, of people crossing paths in different lifetimes. The third had a beat that reminded me of running through puddles as a child. And the sixth unraveled me. It was an acoustic version of an old song. One of those that hurts in a beautiful way. It talked about unspoken promises, about souls that recognize each other even without having ever met. I listened to it 3 times. I cried every time. Not from sadness, but from an emotion I didn't have a name for. That 6th track made me realize I needed to meet Luke. The funny thing is, I didn't know exactly why. It was like my soul already knew his. Like something old and quiet inside me had finally woken up. I closed my eyes and thought, how is it possible to feel so much for someone you've never seen? My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how a stranger without a face reminded me that sometimes the right connection doesn't arrive when we want it, only when we're finally ready to hear it. * if you believe in the power of love, in stories that find you when you're not looking. Stay with me. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, because some hearts speak through music before they ever speak in person. I didn't message Luke for 2 days after that last playlist. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I needed time to feel all the feelings that came crashing through those melodies. Or maybe I just didn't know what to say that could match the weight of what I had felt, but he didn't disappear. On the third morning, I woke up to a new message. What's your favorite memory tied to a song? It wasn't small talk. It wasn't flirtation. It was something deeper. Something thoughtful. Something that said, I'm still here. I'm still listening. I sat on the edge of my bed, the early light filtering through my half-open blinds, and I thought, and then I told him. I was 16. My mom was still alive. We were driving down Highway 72 in her old green Jeep. The windows were down, her hair was wild, and she was singing along to Fleetwood Mac like her heart was wide open. I remember laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. That song still smells like wind and sunscreen and everything I miss about her. He didn't answer for a while. But when he did, it was like a mirror. Mine was with my brother. We were driving home from a concert. The last concert we ever saw together. He played me a track I'd never heard before, and he said, this one's gonna hit you in 10 years, not today. He was right. I didn't ask what had happened to his brother. I didn't have to. That day, we didn't talk about favorites or playlists. We talked about ghosts. About what music brings back. About how it fills the silence we can't explain. I realized something then. He wasn't just someone who liked the same songs I did. He was someone who felt the way I did. Who listened between the lyrics. Who understood that sometimes a 2-minute melody says what 500 words never could. The next night, I sent him something, not a song. Not a message. A voice note. I had never done that before. My voice shook when I recorded it. Hi. I don't even know why I'm sending this, but I thought maybe it's time you heard my voice. I told myself I wouldn't check my phone. That I'd give him space. But 30 minutes later, I heard the soft chime. He sent a voice note back, and that was the moment everything changed. His voice was warm, calmer than I imagined. A little deeper, too. But it wasn't the sound that caught me, it was the silence between his words. The breath before he said my name. The pause before he said, Emily, you sound exactly like I imagined. Like someone I've been waiting to meet for a very long time. And just like that, the space between us started shrinking. We started talking more, but never about ordinary things. We talked about moments. About the smell of old books. About the first time we each had our hearts broken. About the last time we cried in public and didn't care who saw it. He told me his favorite instrument was the piano, but he'd never learned to play. That he kept a keyboard under his bed just in case inspiration ever struck. that his favorite lyric of all time was from a song most people skipped. I told him that I used to write poetry in the back of library books, just short lines, tucked away like secrets I hoped someone would one day find. That when I was a kid, I thought falling in love would sound like violins. And that now. I wasn't so sure. The more we talked, the more I realized I wasn't just learning about Luke, I was remembering parts of myself. Parts one had stopped paying attention to. Parts that had gone quiet. He had this way of making me want to speak again. To listen. To feel. One night, just after midnight, he sent a message. Do you ever wonder if we've met before? I stared at those words for so long. Something about them made my skin prickle. I didn't know why. But somewhere deep inside me, I felt it too. Maybe not in this life, I replied. But maybe our songs have. His reply came quickly. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever read. And then he asked me something I hadn't expected. Would you ever want to meet in person? My heart stopped. Not out of fear, but out of something that felt suspiciously like hope. I didn't answer right away. I needed to be sure this wasn't just something I felt with my ears, but something real, something true, something that could live outside the music. What I didn't know yet was that meeting him would unlock a part of my past I had buried deep. A truth that had been waiting, just like the songs, to be heard, and I wasn't ready, not yet. I didn't say yes right away. When Luke asked if I'd ever want to meet in person, the question hung in the air like the last note of a song, echoing long after the sound had gone. I stared at it, rereading the words, wondering how something so simple could carry so much weight. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was something quieter than that. Something I didn't have a name for yet. Maybe it was the feeling that once we met, nothing would ever be the same. And maybe I wasn't ready to give up the magic of the unknown just yet. So instead of saying yes or no, I sent him another playlist. This one had no title. Just a blank space. 10 songs. Each one chosen carefully, not for lyrics or melody, but for feeling. It was the only way I knew how to answer. He didn't text back. Instead, a few hours later, I got a notification, a new playlist from him. The title was just one word, soon, and somehow, that felt like everything I needed to hear over. The next few days, our conversations deepened in a way I hadn't expected. There was something in the way he asked questions, as if he were peeling away layers I didn't even realize I'd wrapped around myself. He didn't ask me what I did for work, or how I spent my weekends, or if I preferred coffee or tea. He asked me things like, do you remember the first time you ever felt understood? What's a sound that makes you feel safe, even now? Have you ever felt homesick for a place that doesn't exist anymore? I told him the truth about how my mom used to sing softly while folding laundry. About how I used to fall asleep to the sound of wind chimes outside my bedroom window. About a little cabin we used to rent in Vermont every summer, and how I still dream about the smell of its wood floors and the creak of the screen door. And he told me things too, about how his grandmother used to whistle while she watered her plants. About the way his father's old vinyl collection still made the house feel alive. About a small cafe in Portland that had once saved him from a very dark week, just because the barista remembered his name and always added cinnamon without asking. We never ran out of things to say, but underneath all of it, beneath the laughter, the voice notes, the midnight playlists, there was this strange current. Like a thread pulling us towards something we hadn't yet named. And then, something happened. I was at my parents' house for the weekend. I'd brought my laptop to do some writing, but ended up wandering through old boxes in the attic. Dusty corners filled with forgotten bits of life, postcards, yearbooks, high school notebooks, dried out pens, and then I found something. An old CD. Burned, unlabeled. Just a silver disc in a cracked plastic case. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't seen a CD in years, let alone used one. I couldn't remember ever making it. But something about it tugged at me. So I brought it downstairs, dusted off the ancient stereo in the den, and pressed play, static. Then silence, then music. A soft piano intro. A song I hadn't heard in over a decade. My heart slowed. My breath caught. It was a song I used to love as a teenager, but had long forgotten. One I used to play on repeat during one of the loneliest winters of my life. The kind of song that becomes a friend when you feel like you have none, but what truly startled me was what came after. Track 2 started playing, and I froze. It was one of the songs from Luke's playlist. One he'd sent me just days ago, not the same artist. Not the same title, the exact same track. I stood there in the quiet of the living room, surrounded by faded furniture and the faint ticking of the old wall clock, and tried to make sense of it. What were the odds? I took out the CD. Examined it again. Still no label. Just faint black smudges where maybe, years ago, I'd written something that time had erased. That night, I messaged him. Have you ever felt like you've met someone before, but you just can't remember when? He replied a minute later. All the time. Especially with you. I told him about the CD. About the attic. About the track. He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was just 3 words. I burned it. I stared at the screen, heart thudding, unsure if I had read it right. What do you mean? Emily. I think we've met before. My fingers hovered over the screen. My throat went dry. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. My heart knew something my memory didn't, and somewhere inside me, something old began to stir, something familiar, something that sounded a lot like the first note of a song I thought I'd forgotten, but somehow, had always known. I didn't sleep that night. Luke's words echoed in my mind like a melody stuck on loop. I burned it. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it did, but only to a part of me I hadn't listened to in years. I lay awake with my phone resting on my chest, the screen dark but warm from hours of holding it. I kept staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together how a stranger I had never seen could have made a CD I found in my parents' attic, one I didn't even remember owning, unless he wasn't a stranger at all. I got up just before sunrise and made coffee, even though I wasn't sure I could keep it down. Everything felt slightly out of place, like waking from a dream and not knowing which part was real. I opened a notebook I hadn't written in for months and wrote a single sentence. How many things have I forgotten that still remember me? Later that morning, I messaged Luke again. When did you burn that CD? He replied almost instantly. Winter 2006. I used to make them and leave them in library books. My heart stopped. I remembered, not everything. Not clearly. But something. I was 17. There was a boy, quiet, always with headphones around his neck. I didn't know his name, but he used to sit 2 rows behind me in study hall. We never spoke, not once. But one day, I opened a copy of Wuthering Heights at the school library and there it was, a burned CD tucked between the pages. No note. No explanation. Just a track list written in faded pencil. I listened to it that same night on my old stereo. I remember thinking the songs sounded like secrets. Like someone out there understood loneliness the way I did. I kept the CD. Played it for weeks. And then I forgot until now. My hands were shaking when I picked up the phone again. Did you ever go to Claremont High? Another pause. Then, class of 2007. I stood in my parents' kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in the cardigan my mom used to wear, and tried to process what I'd just read. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my fingertips. Luke, I think I found one of your CDs. In the library. Senior year. There was silence on his end for nearly 5 minutes, then, "You're the girl in the blue hoodie." I dropped the phone, not because I was scared, because it was true. I had a blue hoodie. I wore it almost every day that winter. Oversized, with frayed sleeves. I used to hide my hands in it when I felt anxious. Which was often. He remembered me, all these years later. A version of me I'd forgotten existed. I picked the phone back up, tears in my eyes. How did you know? You looked like you were carrying the same kind of silence I was. I didn't know what to say. The ache in my chest was no longer from confusion, it was from recognition. From the quiet shock of being seen after so many years of going unnoticed. We kept texting for hours after that. Both of us trying to fill in the blanks. He told me he never expected anyone to find those CDs. That it was just his way of letting the world know he was there. He said he never forgot the girl in the library who always checked out the sad books and walked like the air was too heavy around her. I told him I remembered the boy with the headphones and the notebooks full of doodles. I told him I always wondered what he was listening to, but never had the courage to ask. So many almosts. So many unsaid words, but somehow, the music found its way through all that silence. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new playlist. It was short, only 5 songs. But every track was from that original CD I found. I called it The Things We Forgot. I sent it to him without saying a word. He didn't reply right away. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence, because now I knew we'd been echoing each other's lives for years without realizing it, and somehow, the universe had pressed play again. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how 2 people could orbit each other for so long and never quite collide until the timing was right. Until the silence became music. Until the ache became recognition. After I sent Luke that playlist, The Things We Forgot, he didn't reply that night. But I didn't panic. Something in me had shifted. The girl I used to be would have stared at her phone, waiting, questioning every second of stillness. But now, I just listened. To the quiet. To my heart. To the strange, soft joy of being. Remembered, the next morning, I woke up to a voice note. His voice was different this time. Slower. Heavier. But warm, like sun through curtains. I listened to it in the dark. Every track. I knew every one by heart. And the last song. Emily, I used to play that one on repeat the night before I left town. I had no idea you'd found that CD. But somehow, I think a part of me hoped someone like you would. He paused, and I could hear his breath catch. Maybe I wasn't making playlists for strangers back then. Maybe I was making them for you, even before I knew your name. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, legs crossed, phone in hand, staring at the screen like it held a different kind of truth. And maybe it did. Because nothing felt accidental anymore. We kept talking, for days, every conversation dug deeper, not into facts or details, but into the soft places people usually keep hidden. We didn't talk about dating history or favorite restaurants. We talked about dreams we'd stopped chasing, people we still missed, songs we couldn't listen to anymore. Because of the memories tied to them. One night, I told him about the boy I thought I'd marry. About how we had matching notebooks and plans to move to Seattle. How he died in a car accident on a Tuesday morning. How silence filled my chest for nearly 2 years after that. Luke didn't say much. Just, grief is a kind of echo, isn't it? And it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. Another night, he told me about his mother. How she used to hum while cooking, even when life was falling apart around them. How music kept her calm, and how he learned early on that melodies were a form of survival. There were no walls between us anymore. Just sound. Just presence. And then one evening, as the sun was disappearing behind the skyline outside my window, he asked again. Emily, would you want to meet me? This time, I didn't hesitate. Yes. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. Or even romance. It was something else. Something quieter. Like closing a book and realizing there was one last chapter you'd missed, and now, you're ready to read it. We picked a date. A place. Simple. A little record shop in Portland. Neutral ground. Familiar enough to feel safe. Strange enough to be exciting. I remember the day we said it. I walked to the mirror and said my own name out loud. I hadn't done that in years. It felt like introducing myself to someone new, and someone old at the same time. I end the days leading up to it, we made one final playlist together. A joint one. A shared soundtrack. We each added 5 songs. No explanation. No order. Just feeling. His first track was one I hadn't heard in years, but as soon as I pressed play, I remembered every word. It was a song my mom used to play in the kitchen, the same one Luke had told me his mother used to hum. I stared at the screen, stunned. How could we both carry the same melody in our bones? I messaged him. This was my childhood. His reply came instantly. Mine too. That night, I opened my old box of cassette tapes, the ones I hadn't touched since college. In the middle, there was one labeled in black marker, For When It Hurts. I hadn't made it. I didn't remember who did, but something told me to play it. I dusted off the old player and pressed rewind. When the tape began, I heard static. Then a piano. Then a voice, not a singer, mine, younger, breathless. If you're hearing this, I guess you found it. Or maybe it found you. I froze. This is for the version of me who forgot how to feel. Or maybe for the one who finally remembered. Then silence, then a song, and I remembered I had known Luke. Maybe not by name. Maybe not by face. But by soul. By sound. We had crossed paths once. Maybe more than once. In the quiet. In the music. In the way grief leaves trails behind for us to follow when we're ready. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was proof that the heart remembers what the mind forgets, and sometimes, the songs we send out into the world find their way home. The days leading up to meeting Luke felt like standing at the edge of something invisible. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement in the usual sense either. It was more like holding your breath before the first note of a song you've waited your whole life to hear. I marked the day on my calendar, just a small no words. I didn't want to label it. I didn't want to jinx whatever this was. By giving it a name too soon, the record store we chose was in Portland. A quiet place on a quiet street, tucked between a used bookstore and a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and rain. We agreed to meet on a Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. Not too early. Not too late. Like everything between us, gentle. Considered I end the days before, I tried not to build too many expectations in my head. But how could I not? I imagined his smile. His posture. The way he'd look at me for the first time, not through text or sound, but with his own eyes. Would I recognize him? Would my heart? What if the magic only lived in the music? What if real life was too loud, too messy for something so delicate, but then I'd press play on our playlist and breathe again, because it was real. All of it. The quiet confessions. The shared grief. The way our memories kept crossing at corners we didn't know we shared. The night before we were supposed to meet, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my floor, back against the bed, a candle flickering on the windowsill. I held my phone in both hands and scrolled through our messages, from the first one to the last. It was like reading a novel I didn't know I'd been writing. One where the plot wasn't made of events, but of feelings. At midnight, he sent me a song. No text. Just a link. I didn't recognize the title. But when I played it, the opening notes stopped me cold. It was a song I used to sing under my breath as a teenager. I hadn't heard it in over 15 years. It wasn't famous. It wasn't even particularly good. But it had lived inside me once, quietly. How did he know? I messaged him, "How did you find this?" His reply came a moment later. I didn't. It found me tonight. Thought it might belong to you. And it did. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom of our connection, something else pulled me deeper. That morning, I woke up early. Too early. I made tea, but didn't drink it. I tried to read, but the words didn't stick. I ended up just staring out the window, watching people pass by as if they were extras in a world that suddenly felt too still. At 11, I started getting ready. I didn't wear anything special, just jeans, a soft sweater, and my mother's old bracelet. Something about it made me feel grounded. Like I was carrying pieces of all the versions of myself that had waited for this without even knowing they were waiting. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't try to perfect anything. I didn't smooth my hair too much or layer on extra mascara. I wanted him to see me. Not the polished version. The real one. The one who cried over song lyrics and forgot how to answer texts for days. The one who wore sadness like a second skin for too long and finally learned how to take it off. Piece by piece, the Uber ride to the record shop felt endless and too short all at once. As we turned the final corner, I saw the shop window, faded posters, a bin of used vinyls, a handwritten open sign swaying slightly in the breeze. I stepped out of the car and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The way the clouds moved above the buildings. The way the air smelled faintly of pine and pavement. The way my hands were shaking, but my heart felt stilled. I checked the time. 1:58. He wasn't there yet. I took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. My reflection followed me in the glass, nervous, vulnerable, waiting inside. The store was quiet. A soft acoustic track played from an old speaker in the back. A girl with purple hair stood behind the counter, humming along. I wandered through the aisles, pretending to browse. I ran my fingers over album covers I didn't recognize. I tried to breathe evenly. I told myself I wasn't being stood up. I told myself even if I was, this moment still mattered. 201.202. I closed my eyes and leaned gently against a wooden shelf, letting the music hold me for just a second longer. Then, a voice, not from a speaker, behind me, warm, low, familiar. Emily? I turned, and there he was. Emily? My name had never sounded like that before. It wasn't the way he said it, it was the way it settled in the air. Like it belonged there. Like it had always been meant to echo off the walls of that little record shop, right in that exact moment. I turned around, and there he was, Luke. He looked familiar. Not in the way I expected. Not like a face from a yearbook or a blurry memory from high school. But familiar like a song I used to hum without even knowing the lyrics. Like a place I dreamed about once and never forgot. He had kind eyes. That's what I noticed first, not his height, not his clothes, not whether he matched the image I'd built in my head, but the way his eyes held me, softly, like he was seeing something precious and didn't want to blink too fast. We stood there, frozen in this strange kind of stillness, like we were both waiting for something to crash, but nothing did. No awkwardness, no apologies, just this quiet knowing. He smiled first. It wasn't a big smile. Just the corners of his lips lifting in that way that says, so it's really you. I felt mine mirror his, without trying. We didn't hug. Not yet. We didn't shake hands, either. It would have felt wrong, too formal. Too small for what we were. So we just stood there, letting the moment stretch long and slow and true. Hi, I said. Hi, he replied. And then we both laughed, softly, nervously. Like we were 13 again and standing at the edge of something we didn't have words for. He looked exactly like someone who had sent me music in the dark, not perfect. Not polished. But open. He had a denim jacket with a frayed collar, a faded green t-shirt, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd run his hands through it too many times on the way over. And there was something in the way he stood, relaxed, but alert. Like he was here, fully present. Listening. I thought you might be early, he said. I smiled. I wasn't sure if I'd actually walk in, though. I wasn't sure I'd actually show up. But you did. So did you. It wasn't small talk. It was more like gentle truth-telling. We walked slowly through the aisles together. Not touching. Just walking. Side by side. I don't remember what music was playing in the background, but it fit, like the world knew we were writing a new track in real time. He stopped in front of a crate of used records. Do you think, he said, flipping through them, that we would have talked back then? In high school? I tilted my head. I don't know. Probably not. Yeah. I think I would have been too shy. I was too invisible. He looked at me, and there was something in his gaze, something kind. You were never invisible. The words knocked something loose inside me. And I didn't say thank you, Because this wasn't about manners. It was about being seen. We found a dusty record by an artist neither of us knew. He handed it to me. Let's pretend this was our first album. The one we bought the day we met. I looked down at the cover. It had a drawing of a girl in a red coat walking into a forest. I smiled. Feels about right. We paid for it together. Neither of us asked who would keep it. We just knew. It would live somewhere between us, wherever that ended up being. Outside, the sky was overcast but not sad. The kind of gray that makes colors pop more vividly. We sat on a bench near the coffee shop, each holding a cup of something warm. He glanced at me. You're quieter in person, he said gently. I'm listening, I replied. He smiled. I like that. There were pauses between our sentences, but none of them were empty. They were full of everything we didn't need to say. I noticed the little things about him, the way he cradled his cup with both hands, the slight crack in his voice when he asked about my morning, the way he looked down and smiled like he was replaying a song in his head, and I wondered what I looked like to him. If he could see how hard my heart was beating. If he could hear it. After a while, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. A small envelope. A CD inside. He handed it to me. No track list, he said. Just listen when you're ready. I held it like it was glass. I will. And then, finally, he asked, can I walk you home? It wasn't just sweet. It was something else. Something almost sacred. Yes, I said, and we walked. Slowly. Side by side. Like we'd been doing this our whole lives without knowing it. Like maybe we weren't meeting for the first time, maybe we were just continuing. We didn't say much on the walk back, and that was the best part. There was something sacred about the silence, about letting the world exist around us without trying to fill every second with noise. The cars passed by. Wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped, and we just walked, side by side, like we'd always done. At one point, Luke gently bumped his shoulder against mine, not hard, just enough to feel like a question. And without looking, I bumped him back. A quiet answer. And I swear I heard him exhale in relief, like that one small gesture had told him everything he needed to know. The air was cool but not cold. My fingers were tucked into the sleeves of my sweater, but I wasn't shivering. My body felt calm. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because something about being next to him settled the noise inside me. We passed a street musician playing an old guitar near a bakery. He was singing something I didn't recognize. Luke stopped, pulling a $5 bill from his pocket and dropping it in the case without a word. Then he turned to me. Let's stand here a minute. So we did. The music was scratchy and imperfect, but heartfelt. Luke closed his eyes for a few seconds, and I watched him, not to study his features, but to memorize the moment. The way his chest rose and fell. The way his foot tapped gently to the rhythm. The way a soft smile crept onto his face, like the song had unlocked some memory he hadn't expected. After a while, he opened his eyes. Do you ever feel like your whole life has been building toward one quiet moment? I nodded. All the time. We started walking again, slower now, like we didn't want the sidewalk to end. When we reached my apartment building, I paused on the bottom step and turned to face him. This is me, I said softly. He looked up at the building, then back at me. It fits you. I laughed. You've seen me for 15 minutes in real life. How do you know what fits me? He tilted his head. Because I've known your voice for weeks. Your playlists. Your stories. You can learn a lot from someone's soundtrack. I smiled, but it felt fragile, like something blooming for the first time in years. I'm glad you came, I whispered. I'm glad you let me. The wind picked up slightly, brushing strands of hair across my face. I went to tuck them behind my ear, but he reached out and did it first, slowly, gently, like he wasn't sure if it was okay but hoped it would be. I didn't pull away. He let his fingers linger for just a second longer than necessary, then he dropped his hand, looked at the ground, and said, I don't want to mess this up. You're not, I said. You couldn't. He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe that. I've been quiet for a long time, he said. I forgot how to be around people like this. Like what? Real. Unfiltered. You don't have to remember all at once. He nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out something else, a folded piece of notebook paper, slightly wrinkled. I was going to keep this for later, but now feels right. I took it from him. You wrote me something? He shrugged. It's not a poem. I'm terrible at poetry. It's just a note. I unfolded it as he watched. In his handwriting, uneven and open, it read, if the world had a rewind button. I think I'd still want to meet you this way. Slow. Honest. Through the static. I stared at the words for a long time, then looked up. Luke, I said, yeah? I don't think we met late. He raised an eyebrow. I think we met right on time. His smile, then, was different. Less careful. Less guarded. It was the kind of smile that makes you feel warm in your ribs. The kind that belongs in the middle of a great song, not the end. I want to see you again, he said. You will. He nodded once. Then twice, and then he did something I didn't expect. He leaned in, not fast, not certain, just hopeful, and he pressed his forehead gently against mine. No kiss, just closeness, quiet contact. A pause inside the noise. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I didn't feel like a woman standing on the steps of her apartment in a gray sweater. I felt like a melody, soft, true, and finally, heard. The next few weeks passed like a song on repeat, familiar, comforting, and impossible to get tired of. Luke and I didn't jump into anything. There were no grand declarations, no sudden changes. Everything unfolded gently. Naturally. Like the kind of melody that doesn't rush to the chorus because it knows the verses matter just as much. We didn't see each other every day, but often enough that I never had to wonder if he disappeared. He would text in the morning sometimes. Rainy today. Made a playlist. Want it? Or in the middle of the afternoon, this song reminded me of your laugh. Or late at night, can't sleep. Can I send you something beautiful? He always could. I started to collect his messages. The way people collect postcards from places they never thought they'd go. I'd reread them on quiet days and feel a kind of warmth that didn't ask for anything. It just stayed. One Sunday, he came over with 2 paper bags. One filled with vinyl records from a flea market, the other with oranges and cinnamon rolls, breakfast and background music, he said, smiling at my door. We didn't leave the apartment all day. I had candles lit, soft jazz playing, and the heater on full blast even though it wasn't that cold. We sat on the floor and listened to records, biting into sticky pastries and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood dog named Max, who used to run in circles. Whenever someone said the word Thursday, I told him about how I used to sing into a hairbrush and pretend the bathroom mirror was Madison Square Garden. He laughed with his whole face. Not loud, but full. Like the sound had roots. At one point, we both reached for the same vinyl, and our hands touched, just briefly, but long enough that I forgot whatever I was about to say. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. Instead, he said quietly, I like this. This? I asked. This. Us. How quiet it feels. But not empty. Just peaceful. I nodded. Like a good song you don't need to explain. He smiled. Exactly. We didn't kiss that day either, and I didn't mind, because every moment with Luke felt like something rare, a story unfolding in real time. No rushing. No skipping ahead. Just turning the page, one breath at a time. One evening, he brought me something wrapped in brown paper. I found this at a thrift store, he said. I think it was waiting for you. It was a music box, old, delicate, a little scratched. When I opened it, a soft lullaby played. The kind that feels like childhood, like long car rides, like someone brushing your hair while you fall asleep. My eyes welled up. I don't know why, but this feels like something I've heard before, I whispered. He looked at me gently. Maybe you have. I placed it on my nightstand that night and let it play as I drifted off, and that's when I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of falling. Not of being known. Not even of remembering. I used to guard my heart like it was something fragile, like it might crack if anyone looked too closely. But with Luke, it didn't feel like glass. It felt like something alive. Breathing. Healing. We took walks. We made dinners out of whatever was in the fridge. We sent each other voice notes reading poetry we'd never share with anyone else. One night, I was sitting on my couch in socks and an oversized hoodie, scrolling through photos of my mom I hadn't looked at in years. I sent one to him, no caption. She was holding me as a baby, barefoot in the grass, eyes closed as she sang. A minute later, he replied. She looks like she hummed more than she spoke. I smiled through tears. She did. Now I know where your stillness comes from. Luke didn't try to fix my sadness. He didn't talk over it. He just sat with it, like a song that plays low in the background, steady, gentle, always there. One afternoon, we sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea. Outside, the wind was busy, but the apartment felt still. He was reading a page from my old journal, one I had let him borrow, trusting that he'd see the words the way I meant them. After a long pause, he looked up. I've been thinking about something, he said. Yeah? If we hadn't met this way, through music, through messages, do you think we still would have found each other? I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, the curve of his mouth, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he never looked away when I got quiet, and then I said, I think the songs would have kept trying until we listened. He smiled. That smile I'd learned to trust more than words, and in that moment, with a cup of tea cooling between us and the sound of wind pushing gently against the window pane, I knew this wasn't just a love story. It was a soundtrack, and it was still playing. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that passes without asking for attention. The kind of day that doesn't announce anything big. Overcast sky. Half-drunk coffee. A to-do list I hadn't touched since morning. I had just gotten home from work. Luke wasn't coming over that night. We'd agreed to give each other space. Sometimes, not out of distance, but out of respect for the quiet we both used to live in. We knew the value of solitude, of letting love grow without crowding it. Still, the apartment felt a little emptier than usual. I kicked off my shoes, played one of our softer playlists, and opened the windows just enough to let in the evening breeze. Then I saw it, a small padded envelope sitting on the floor just inside my door. No stamp. No name. Just my address in careful handwriting. I picked it up, curious. It wasn't from Luke. He always sent his surprises in person. No text. No warning. Inside the envelope was a cassette tape. No label. No case. Just the tape itself, slightly worn, with a small post-it note stuck to it that simply read, "You'll know." I stared at it, a strange shiver running through me. I hadn't owned a cassette player in years, until Luke found one for me at a garage sale 2 weeks ago. He'd fixed it up, cleaned the dust, and surprised me with it one night after dinner. "You said once that tapes felt like time machines," he said. "So I figured you should have one." That night, I plugged the player into the wall, inserted the tape, and pressed play. It started with silence. Then a soft scratch. Then, piano. The song was familiar, but not in the way most songs are. It was familiar in the way dreams sometimes are. The melody unfolded slowly, gently, like it was trying not to startle me. Then a voice, not Luke's, not mine. A woman's, singing, not a performance. Just a voice. Recorded in a room somewhere, imperfect and beautiful in its rawness, and I knew. It was my mother. I didn't know how, but I knew. I stood frozen, hand on the cassette player, eyes wet before I could blink. I hadn't heard her voice in over 15 years, and yet here it was, humming a lullaby I couldn't name, but my body remembered. She was younger in the recording. I could tell by the way her voice carried, lighter, like wind through branches. How had this gotten to me? Where had it come from? The song ended, and for a long time, the tape was silent. I didn't reach for the stop button. I just stood there, as still as the room around me. Then, faintly, there was a soft rustle. And her voice again, this time. Speaking. "If you're hearing this, I hope it means you're safe. I hope it means you've found your music again." My knees buckled. I sat on the floor, arms wrapped around myself, not crying, but holding something I didn't know I still carried. Life will surprise you, Emmy. It always does. But music will bring you home. And that was it. The tape ended. I didn't move for a long time. That night, I called Luke. He answered on the second ring. "I'm okay," I said first, my voice hoarse. "You don't sound okay." I don't know what just happened. But I think my mother left me something. Somehow. And it just found me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. I told him about the envelope, the tape, the voice, the lullaby. I couldn't name but never forgot. When I finished, there was silence on the line for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you want me to come over?" And I did. He arrived 20 minutes later, no coat, just a sweatshirt and his familiar expression, the one that said, "I'm here." However long it takes. I played the tape for him again. We sat on the floor together, shoulders touching, the sound of her voice filling the room like candlelight. When it ended, he didn't speak right away. Then softly, he said, "She gave you music. Even from wherever she is now." I nodded. "And she sent it when I was ready to hear it." He placed his hand over mine. No pressure. Just presence. "Do you think she knew?" I asked, knew what? That I'd need it now. That I'd be with someone who would understand. He didn't answer, but his fingers laced through mine, and that was all I needed. Later, he stood in my kitchen making tea while I sat curled up on the couch, the tape resting beside me like an artifact from another life. I looked at him, back turned, focused on the kettle, and felt something new, not just love, but memory, future and past braided together in the shape of now. And I realized something: this wasn't just the soundtrack of US to IT, was the soundtrack of everyone who had carried us here. Of the people we lost, of the voices that stayed, of the silence that taught us how to listen, and somehow, it was still being written. Something shifted after the tape, not in a dramatic way. Not suddenly. But like the quiet turning of a page, you don't hear it, but everything after it changes. Luke stayed that night, not because I asked, not because we planned it, but because neither of us could quite leave the moment behind. We didn't sleep in each other's arms. That wasn't our rhythm. Instead, he took the armchair across from my bed and read while I lay beneath the covers, staring at the ceiling, still listening to my mother's voice echoing in the corners of the room. I fell asleep to the sound of pages turning and his steady breathing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dream. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I found Luke in the kitchen, barefoot, hair messy, reading the back of a cereal box like it held the secrets of the universe. "You're up," he said, smiling gently. "Didn't want to wake you. You stayed." "Of course I did." He poured me a cup and handed it to me without a word. I took it, held the warmth in both hands, and sat across from him at the little table. Near the window, outside, the sky was soft and gray. Inside, it was all quiet comfort. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. It felt like a message. Like she knew something I didn't. Maybe she did. He said it so simply. Like it was just truth. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the wind move the trees. "I think I want to find out more," I said finally. "About the tape. Where it came from. Why now?" Luke nodded. "Let's look together." And that's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was ours. That weekend, we drove to my childhood home. The house had been rented out since my father moved to Florida. But the current tenants, a quiet older couple, were kind enough to let me go through the attic. After a little convincing and a promise not to take up too much time, Luke climbed the creaky ladder first, flashlight in hand. I followed, the smell of old wood and dust filling my lungs like a memory. It was exactly how I remembered it: boxes labeled in faded marker, old furniture under white sheets, a stack of framed pictures wrapped in newspaper, and then, in the far corner, a box marked simply, "For Emily." My breath caught. I hadn't seen it before. Not ever. Luke helped me drag it into the light. Inside were things I hadn't realized were missing: drawings I'd made in elementary school, a music box shaped like a piano, a worn envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting, and beneath all of it, a second cassette, this one labeled, "In case she ever forgets." I sat down on the floor, the tape in my lap, hands shaking slightly. Luke didn't speak. He just sat beside me, his presence quiet and steady. I didn't play it then. Not yet. I wanted to be ready. Back in the car, the box between us, Luke reached for my hand, not to comfort, but to remind me, "I'm here. I'm still here." I think she knew. I whispered. "What?" "That I'd be lost for a while. That I'd forget who I was. And I think she left these pieces So you could find your way back. I looked at him, and maybe so I could find you. He squeezed my hand once. I don't believe in coincidence anymore. Me neither. We didn't play the radio on the drive home, we let the silence say what words couldn't, that night. We sat on my living room floor and played the second tape that it started with humming. Then her voice, older this time. Emmy, if you're listening to this, it means the world didn't swallow you whole. It means you're still standing. And maybe, just maybe, you've let someone stand beside you. My throat tightened. There are things I won't get to tell you. But I trust you'll find them. In music. In letters. In the quiet. She paused. And if there's someone in your life now who listens when you go quiet, hold on to him. That kind of love. It doesn't come often. Luke looked at me, eyes glassy. I pressed my forehead to his, just like he had that first day outside the record store. We didn't cry. We just felt together. My mother had given me many things, but this was something else entirely. This was legacy. A love that stretched across years, across loss, across silence, and handed itself to me when I was ready to receive it. Later, Luke put on a record, one we'd found in a thrift store weeks ago. It played. He stood and offered his hand. Dance with me? He asked. In our socks? I teased. In our souls. I took his hand, and we danced, slow, swaying, heart to heart, not just as two people who had met through songs, but as two people who had become one. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive loudly, sometimes, it walks in quietly, and builds a soundtrack. So honest, so steady, so true, you don't even realize it's playing until you find yourself dancing. It's strange how love can live in the quietest corners of life, not in the grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but in the mornings. When he hands me a mug of coffee without asking how I take it, because he already knows. In the way he pulls my blanket higher when I fall asleep on the couch. In the way we move around each other in the kitchen like we've been doing it for years, not months. This is the part of the story no one writes songs about, but maybe they should, because it's here, in the stillness, in the ordinary, that the real music plays. Luke started keeping a notebook. A small, worn one that he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket. At first, I thought it was for lyrics. Or maybe journal entries, but one night, while we were watching the rain streak down the living room window, he handed it to me. It's for you, he said. But not yet. You'll know when. I didn't ask questions. Somehow, we'd both learned to let things unfold in their own time. One Sunday afternoon, we went to the flea market just outside town. The air smelled like popcorn and old wood, and people wandered slowly, the way people do when they're not in a hurry to be anywhere else. Luke found a vinyl copy of Rumors, the album I'd told him I used to dance to in the kitchen with my mother. He held it up, grinning. Think this counts as fate? I nodded. Definitely. We played it that evening while making dinner, him chopping vegetables, me stirring something I was pretending not to burn. When Songbird came on, he put down the knife, wiped his hands, and walked over to me. He didn't say anything. Just pulled me close, slowly, as the soft voice filled the room. We danced there, barefoot, the scent of garlic in the air, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. Just us. Just now I rested my head against his chest and listened, not to his words, but to his heart, and it sounded like home. One evening, I found an old photo album tucked away in the back of my bookshelf. I hadn't opened it in years. Dust clung to the cover like memory. I flipped through slowly, smiling at crooked baby teeth, birthday cakes, vacations I barely remembered. Then I found a photo I didn't recognize. It was a group picture, me, a few friends, a park in the background, and standing far in the back. Someone familiar, headphones around his neck. A denim jacket, Luke. I stared at it for minutes. My heart beat quietly but hard. We'd been in the same place, once. Long before playlists. Long before messages, I took a photo of it and sent it to him. With no caption. He replied almost instantly. I remember that day. I didn't know you were there. Neither did I. Funny how the universe keeps trying until we notice. Maybe we were supposed to miss each other, until we didn't. He didn't respond for a long time, then he sent me a voice note. I used to think love had to be loud to be real. But now I think, maybe love is the thing that waits quietly. The thing that never stops humming beneath the noise. I listened to that note more times than I'll admit. One night, we sat by the window, wrapped in the same blanket, watching snow fall for the first time that season. He handed me the notebook. The one you said was for later? He nodded. It's later. I opened it carefully. The first page had a date. The day we first exchanged messages. Then, beneath it, just 3 words, you changed everything. I flipped the page. There were songs, titles and lyrics. Little moments we'd shared, memories I didn't know he'd written down. Things I'd said, things he'd noticed, scribbled like they mattered, because they did. Page after page of small things. A drawing of my coffee mug. A sentence I whispered in my sleep, the name of the song I'd once hummed absent-mindedly that he'd memorized without me knowing, and on the very last page, this is what love sounds like when it listens. I closed the notebook slowly, like it was made of glass. When I looked up at him, I couldn't speak. So I just leaned forward, rested my forehead against his, and let my breath say everything my words couldn't. I didn't need a song playing in the background. I didn't need the right words, because he already knew. He always had, and somewhere in the quiet between us, I knew, too. Love doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it starts with a message, sometimes with a melody, and sometimes it waits in the stillness, until we're finally ready to press play. Some love stories begin with sparks, ours began with silence, and now, months later, I've realized, it's not the noise that stays. It's the quiet. The steady rhythm. The feeling of being held without being gripped. Of being seen without being explained. Luke and I had settled into something that didn't need to be named every day. It was just there, woven into everything. In how we moved, how we paused, how we listened. He kept showing up in the small things, folding my laundry while I took a long shower after work, tucking handwritten notes into the pages of books he knew I'd reread, putting on a record when he noticed I hadn't spoken in a while, choosing the exact one that held the kind of silence I needed. We weren't trying to impress each other anymore. We were simply existing together, and somehow that felt like the most romantic thing in the world. One morning, we took a drive with no destination. We packed coffee in thermoses, a bag of old CDs, and a blanket in case we found a place to stop. No plan. Just music and road. We drove past fields, through sleepy towns, beneath trees whose leaves had begun to give in to fall. Luke drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gearshift, fingers twitching to the beat of whatever song came on. At one point, he played something I hadn't heard in years, a track I used to play on loop the summer after college. When I wasn't sure who I was or where I was going, I looked at him, surprised. How do you know this? He shrugged. You mentioned it once. I remembered. I stared out the window, blinking hard. He remembered everything, not out of effort, but out of care. There's a difference. We pulled over at a small overlook just outside a town whose name neither of us could pronounce. Below us, hills rolled quietly into the distance, brushed in gold and fading green. We got out, wrapped ourselves in the blanket, and sat on the hood of the car. It was quiet, really quiet. No traffic. No music. Just wind and breath and the weight of the moment. Luke leaned his head against mine. I've been thinking about time, he said. Dangerous, I teased. He smiled. I used to think it was always running out. That I had to catch love before it passed me by. That everything was on some invisible deadline. And now? Now I think, time isn't something we're chasing. It's something we build. Like a playlist. Track by track. I closed my eyes. That's exactly what it felt like we were building time. Together, back at home, I sat at the piano I hadn't touched in years. It had belonged to my mom. Luke was in the kitchen, humming something under his breath. I pressed one key. Then another. Then slowly, a melody came. It was one I didn't recognize, but my fingers did. Somewhere between memory and instinct, a song was being born. Luke came and stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just listened. When I finished, he walked over, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "That's the one." The one? The track we were missing. I looked up at him. Think it belongs on our soundtrack? He nodded. It's the bridge. I smiled. You always know what part of the story we're in. He sat beside me, and we played the last few notes together, not perfectly. Not in sync, but in harmony. Later that night, we lay in bed, backs to each other, our feet tangled under the blanket. I whispered, "Do you think we'll always be this way?" He turned, slid his hand into mine beneath the sheets. "No," he said, and I waited, "but I think we'll always come back to this. No matter what changes. This is the home key." The phrase made my chest ache, in the best way. I didn't answer. I just squeezed his hand. Twice. A language we built. A promise we didn't have to say out loud. Sometimes I wonder if people ever really know the moment their story turns from beginning to forever. If it's a kiss. Or a conversation. Or a song. For me, it was none of those. It was standing in the kitchen while he washed the dishes, and I stood barefoot in the hallway, humming that melody I'd found earlier, and he looked over his shoulder, smiled, and said, "Don't stop." That was it. No fireworks, just the moment I knew our love wasn't a single chorus or a perfect refrain. It was the whole album, track by track, quiet and full, honest and flawed, and still, somehow, beautiful. I've always believed that we don't remember entire years, we remember moments, snapshots, the sound of rain against the window the first time we held hands in silence, the way Luke hummed while tying his shoes. Always off key, always unconsciously, the feeling of his sweatshirt sleeves brushing against my fingertips when he reached over me to grab something from a cabinet. Tiny, quiet, ordinary things, but they root themselves somewhere deep. In the kind of memory that doesn't fade when the photo album closes or when playlists change. That's how love works, I think, not in explosions, but in echoes. One evening in late November, I came home to find a small envelope taped to my front door. No name, just a sketch, drawn in pencil, of a cassette tape, with the word side B. I smiled before I even opened it. Inside was a note from Luke. For everything we didn't know we were waiting for. For what comes next. For side B. And beneath it, a key. I knew exactly what it opened, his apartment, the place I'd visited 100 times, but never with my own key. I didn't call him. I just walked down the block, took the stairs, and let myself in. He was sitting on the floor, headphones on, notebook open. He didn't hear me at first. But when he looked up, he smiled like he'd been expecting me the whole time. I held up the key. He nodded. Side B. I Sat beside him, and for a while, we didn't say anything. We just listened to a playlist that had no title, because not everything needed one. It was filled with songs that didn't try too hard. Tracks that let you breathe. Lyrics that didn't shout. He looked at me. Do you ever wonder what version of you I met? I tilted my head. What do you mean? I mean, the first time. When we were kids. In the library. In the park. All. Those little almosts. I thought about it, about all the versions of me that had existed before I ever let someone fully see me. I think, I said slowly, you met the girl I was meant to grow into. He leaned his forehead against mine. You feel like fate. I whispered back, you feel like choice. Around that time, we began building a shelf, not metaphorically, an actual shelf in my apartment, right by the window where the sun hit in the late afternoon. It was for our music, cassettes, vinyl, CDs, old notes folded into the spines of albums. Polaroids. Ticket stubs. We didn't call it anything, but in my heart, it was our archive, not of things, but of feelings. Every object on that shelf carried weight, the tape from my mom, the thrift store vinyl, the burned CD Luke had made as a teenager. Never knowing I'd find it 10 years later, we added slowly. Carefully. It wasn't a rush to fill the space. It was a quiet promise. Let's make this last point. One night, just before bed, I asked him something I'd never asked before. Do you ever worry it's too good? He looked at me, confused. This. Us. Like, maybe it's too soft. Too perfect. He laughed. Not cruelly. Gently. Like he understood, it's not perfect, he said. We argue about pasta shapes. I smiled. True. You lose socks. In the dryer like it's a sport. I laughed. I leave coffee rings on every surface, he added, and you talk to your plants, I said, they need conversation. We both laughed, and then, he got quiet. Emily, he said. I don't need perfect. He looked at me like he was memorizing my breath. I just need this. And that's when I realized, we weren't building something flawless, we were building something true, and in that moment, wrapped in blankets, soft music playing low, fingers entwined. I felt everything, the girl I had been, the silence I had lived in, the music that had found me anyway, and the man who listened, always listened. The next morning, I added a small note to the shelf, folded it neatly, tucked behind our copy of Rumors.it. Said, some stories don't have climaxes. Just steady hearts. Just hands that reach for the volume instead of the door. Because this wasn't a story about falling, it was a story about staying. Sometimes I think about how it all began, not with a kiss, not with a date, but with a message. A single sentence, tied to a song. Track 5 broke me a little. And somehow, in that single line, my entire life turned. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe in timing. In music. In people finding each other not when it's convenient, but when their hearts are tuned to the same quiet frequency. That's what Luke and I were. 2 songs playing in different rooms, until the door opened. And we realized we'd been part of the same record all along. Years have passed since that first playlist, and still, on quiet mornings, I wake up before him, make coffee the way he likes it, and sit at the edge of the bed, just watching him breathe, not because I'm waiting for anything to happen, but because this is the thing that's happening, life, together. Our shelf is fuller now. We've added new things. A postcard from a trip to Maine. A pressed flower from a hike we swore we wouldn't take but did anyway. A USB drive labeled for when we forget. But my favorite thing, a small card, tucked between 2 old albums. In his handwriting, it says, play this when you need to remember who you are. I've never opened it, because I haven't needed to, not yet, but I like knowing it's there, waiting, just in case. We still make playlists, sometimes for each other, sometimes together, sometimes in complete silence, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both of us adding songs one by one, without saying a word, and somehow, they always make sense. One day, we played one of those lists while cooking, and halfway through track 3, Luke turned to me and said, "This one feels like forever." I didn't ask what he meant, I just nodded, because I knew, not every love is meant to stay, but some are meant to remain. To echo. Hum beneath the skin, long after the last note fades. Luke and I, we hummed. We always will. People ask sometimes if we believe in soulmates. We usually smile at each other before answering. Luke says, "Not exactly." I say, "Maybe." But what I really believe in is this: in playlists made of memories, in voices heard long before faces are seen, in hands that don't let go, not because they have to, but because they choose to. I believe in side B. In the part of the tape where most people stop listening, but the real song begins, and I believe that love, real love, isn't the song itself, it's what stays after the music ends. This is how I remember us. Not in a climax, not in a perfect final track, but in the soft click of a cassette player rewinding, in the warmth of a second verse you didn't notice the first time, in the space between notes, where the heart lives. Luke once told me, some people are albums, but you're a whole record store. I laughed when he said it, but now I understand, because every part of me holds a song, the girl I used to be, the silence I survived, the voices that carried me, and the man who walked in, not to complete me, but to join me, track for track, moment by moment. And maybe that's what love really is, not a soundtrack you stumble into, but one you build, together, patiently, quietly, with your whole soul, until one day, you press play, and realize you've been listening to home all along.